Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's latest instalment of our seminar series, Research Bites. So I'm chairing today's session on behalf of Dolores, who's otherwise engaged today at a conference. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning, our very own Emma Regan. Emma is postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Food and Health here in UCD, with an interest in sensory science, and she's currently working on the dairy fermentates pillar for Food for Health Ireland. Emma graduated with her BSc in Food Science from UCD in 2016 and has just recently completed her PhD in the Institute of Food and Health, focused on understanding sensory perceptions of older adults with a view to their response to oral nutritional supplements. And this research will be the focus of Emma's talk this morning. So let me hand you over now to Emma, and please pop your questions into the chat and we can come back to those at the end.
Perfect. Thanks, Emma. Thanks for the introduction. And I hope you can all hear me okay. But thank you for inviting me to speak today. And as Emma said, so the research I will be discussing today focuses on the sensory perceptions of oral nutritional supplements by older adults. So I'm just going to begin with a brief background behind the research. So global life expectancy is continuously rising, and as a result, the population of individuals that are aged 60 years and older is growing annually. So it's actually predicted that by 2050, the global population of individuals that are aged 60 years and older will have reached 2 billion, and that's over double the amount that was recorded in 2015. And you can see that quite clearly from these two contrasting maps here. So you would think that because life expectancy is continuously rising, that individuals are living longer, healthier lives, but this isn't necessarily the case, and malnutrition remains a common concern in older adults globally. So what exactly is malnutrition? Malnutrition is described as an imbalance in nutrient intake, and this imbalance can be either due to excessive nutrient intake or insufficient nutrient intake. Now, the malnutrition that's commonly associated with older adults generally stems from a reduction in food and caloric intake or undernutrition. And it's estimated that between 5 to 10% of community-dwelling older adults are suffering from undernutrition. So there are many negative health effects associated with malnutrition, and these include but aren't limited to factors such as sarcopenia, osteoporosis, increased frailty, decreased functional competence, and a general increase in morbidity and mortality. So due to the many negative health effects associated with malnutrition, individuals suffering from malnutrition require increased general practitioner visits, increased outpatient visits, and longer hospital stays. And this is placing a huge economic burden on healthcare systems globally. In Ireland alone, the annual cost of malnutrition is over 1.4 billion, and that's over 10% of the healthcare budget. So it's important for us as food researchers to understand what are the factors that are influencing food choice and intake in older adults. So there are a number of different factors that can contribute to food choice and intake, and these can range from anywhere from isolation and energy requirements right the way through to appetite, cognitive state, oral health. But one predominant factor influencing food choice and intake in older adults, and I suppose the factor that my research is mainly focusing in on, is the sensory perception of foods by older adults. So the sensory perception of foods occurs throughout oral processing, and it incorporates all 5 of the senses, so touch, sight, taste, smell, and sound. Now, as an individual progresses through life, numerous physiological and non-physiological changes can occur, and these can affect all 5 of the senses. And it can lead to changes in how people are perceiving their foods. It can lead to a decline in sensory perception of foods and impairment in sensory perception of foods, all of which will contribute to individuals' food choice and intake. So the current method for alleviating malnutrition in older adults is through the use of oral nutritional supplements combined with dietary counselling. So what exactly are oral nutritional supplements? So these are predominantly liquid, semi-solid, or powder-style food products, and they generally contain a wide range of macro and micronutrients, quite often in small food portions. Now, while these oral nutritional supplements combined with dietary counselling are effective in alleviating malnutrition in older adults, this is only the case if the full prescribed amount is consumed. But unfortunately, there are numerous reports out there of high levels of wastage of these supplements and poor compliance and adherence to these supplements. And this is due to a wide range of factors, some of which include their sensory profiles, so the likes of their taste, unpleasant aftertaste and mouthfeel, issues around taste fatigue, appetite and thirst. So it's important for us to understand how can we improve uptake of these supplements in older adults. So in order to do this, we need to get feedback on how these older adults are experiencing these supplements. And to do this, we can conduct sensory evaluations with oral nutritional supplements with older adult cohorts. Now, the only issue here is that the area of sensory science with older adults remains quite under-researched. And for this reason, we actually don't know that much as to which sensory techniques are suitable for use with older adults. So I suppose this kind of brings me on to the objective of my research. So the objective is kind of twofold. So the first being to assess the effectiveness of these different sensory methodologies for use with older adults. So to determine what techniques are suitable for use with these older adults, and then to look at the factors that are driving liking, disliking, and preference of these oral nutritional supplements in older adult cohorts. So this brings me on to the first study, which I completed as part of my PhD. So this research study looked at whether the check all that apply technique is suitable for use with older adults. So we took the approach of comparing younger adults and older adults with this technique. And we used oral nutritional supplements in this study so that we were also getting feedback on the sensory profiles of these supplements by older adults, as well as their liking and the appetite experience when they're consuming these oral nutritional supplements. And this study has been published in the Journal of Food Quality and Preference. So in terms of the experimental design for this study, so this study involved the recruitment of 80 18 to 35-year-olds and 80 over 65-year-olds. And they completed 2 visits to the UCD sensory suites. And in these visits, they consumed one of these 2 supplements. So supplement 1, ONS1, was a low viscosity oral nutritional supplement, and supplement 2, ONS2, was a high viscosity oral nutritional supplement. And in each visit, they consumed the full volume of the supplement, and it was 1 bottle, so 200 mils. But we took the approach of separating it into 5 different cups so that the individuals could evaluate each cup, or we called them sips. So that meant we were getting information on the perception and liking as the intake of these supplements increased. So they used the check all that apply technique to evaluate these supplements. And how this technique works is based on the premise of people consuming a food or beverage, and they're basically asked then to select from a list of attributes, which you can see here, all of the attributes which they feel best describe the food or drink, in this case, the oral nutritional supplement which they've just consumed. And they were also asked in this study to rate their liking of the supplements, and we also recorded appetite, so we have information on that as well. So in terms of the results from this study, so older adults were less hungry and thirsty than younger adults were, and hunger decreased with increasing consumption volume of these oral nutritional supplements, while it was interesting to note that thirst actually increased with increasing consumption volume of these oral nutritional supplements. Then when we looked at liking, so liking was recorded using a 9-point hedonic scale. So it ranged from dislike extremely right the way up to like extremely. And there was no difference in liking between the younger and older adults for either of the supplements. Both cohorts also rated their liking between 5 and 7, which would be between neither like nor dislike and like moderately. So they found the supplements in this case tolerable. Then in terms of the attributes which they selected, so in terms of the older adults, texture and mouthfeel attributes were coming across as driving liking and disliking of these supplements. So say, for example, the likes of creamy, milky and silky were increasing the liking of these supplements, whereas the likes of watery and runny caused a decline in liking of these supplements in the older adults. Younger adults selected more flavor and taste attributes than the older adults did. And the texture perception of these supplements differed with age. So this kind of goes back to my previous points relating to how your sensory perception of foods can change as you progress through life. So then from a methodology point of view, so there was no difference in the number of attributes selected between the two cohorts, and both age groups could effectively discriminate between the two products, which were different in terms of their viscosity profiles. So for this reason, we can then say that both cohorts in this study were equally capable of using the check all that apply technique. So in this case, this technique was suitable for use with community dwelling older adults. It is important, though, to note that this technique might lack the sensitivity to describe changes in perception across the SIPs. So when we looked at the sensory profile across the SIPs, there wasn't really a huge change in the sensory profile across the SIPs, which may be down to the lack of sensitivity in this technique. So then I suppose in terms of the take-home messages from this study, so the first one from the methodology point of view being that kata is appropriate for use with community dwelling older adults, and also that age affects oral nutritional supplement perception. So now that we've looked at the younger versus older adults, we then wanted to look in more detail at the older adult cohort. So this study uses the data which we gathered from the previous study, and we basically ran further analysis and looked in more detail at just the older adult cohort. So what we wanted to look at is, do the likes of age, dentures or medication affect how these older adults are perceiving and liking these oral nutritional supplements? And this study is also published in the Journal of Food Quality and Preference. So in terms of the results and findings from this study, so we were able to see that denture wearing influenced the texture and mouthfeel perception of these oral nutritional supplements, while medication status affected flavor perception and liking of the supplements. Over 75-year-olds had significantly lower appetite than 65 to 74-year-olds throughout the tasting of the supplements. And it was also interesting to note that the attribute vanilla drove liking for low viscosity supplements, but it drove disliking for high viscosity supplements. Again, mouthfeel was coming across as an important factor driving liking and disliking of these oral nutritional supplements in the different older adult cohorts. And from the first study, we were able to say that community dwelling older adults were capable of using this technique. But then from this further analysis, we were able to go into further detail and say that this technique was actually suitable for use in the different older adult cohorts. So the over 75-year-olds versus 65 to 74-year-olds were equally capable of using this technique. So then in terms of the take-home messages here, the first being the importance of conducting sensory evaluations with different segments of the older adult population, as opposed to just treating them all as a one-size-fits-all approach. And then also perhaps using a tailored approach to designing these oral nutritional supplement products for different subgroups. So for denture wearers or medication users, that might improve adherence. So then for the next study, which we did, so one of the things that kept cropping up from our previous research that I just discussed was that texture and mouthfeel are driving liking and disliking of these supplements in older adults. So we wanted to look at this in more detail, but also to incorporate the methodology piece. So this study then looks at, is temporal dominance of sensation, so TDS technique, is that suitable for the dynamic texture evaluation of beverage products, in this case oral nutritional supplements, with older adults? So for the experimental design here, so this involved the recruitment of 35 18 to 35-year-olds, and 35 over 65-year-olds. And this study was completed over one visit. And in this one visit, the individuals consumed 4 different oral nutritional supplements, and they were different in terms of their viscosity and texture profiles. So they ranged from ONS1, which was a low viscosity supplement, right the way through to ONS4, which was a high viscosity supplement. And how they evaluated these supplements was through the TDS technique. So unlike the kata technique, which I previously described, they weren't selecting all of the attributes which best describe these oral nutritional supplements. So this time, what they were actually doing was they were taking a sip of the drink and then they were pressing start straight away. So they consumed 3 sips of each drink, and it was over a 120-second period of time. So what happened was once they consumed the drink and pressed start, they were then asked to just select the one attribute which they felt best described the drink which they had just consumed. Now, as I said, it was over a 120-second period, over 3 sips. So this one attribute might have changed. If that did, and if a new attribute captured their attention more to describe that drink, they were then asked to select this new attribute. So then from this, you're then able to determine a dynamic profile. So with time, so you're able to see the sensory profile throughout the tasting period for this technique. So then in terms of the results, so in this study, the older adults waited longer to select temporal dominance of sensation technique was actually suitable for use with the community dwelling adults in this study. In terms of liking then, so both cohorts in this study found the supplements tolerable. Viscosity did not impact liking for either cohort, but they were only consuming 3 sips, which was 45 mils, which was a lot smaller than our first study. So perhaps with larger consumption volumes, we might see different results here. When we compared the age groups then, so older adults liked the high viscosity supplements significantly more than the younger adults did. So that was also interesting to see. So these graphs here would be kind of typical plots that you might see in a TDS study. So essentially what they show you is there's a horizontal line separating each of the plots. Any attributes or colored lines that are above the horizontal line would represent attributes that were significantly higher in dominance for the younger cohort, whereas the attributes below that line would represent attributes that were significantly higher in dominance for the older cohort. So then when we look at supplements 1 and 2, the low viscosity supplements, there were very little differences in perception between the 2 cohorts here. But then when you look at the higher viscosity supplements, there were much clearer differences in perception between the 2 age cohorts for those supplements. So then in terms of the take-home message for this study, so TDS is an appropriate technique for evaluating the dynamic texture perception of beverage products with older adults, but larger consumption volumes are needed to draw more insight on whether the viscosity of these supplements is impacting on liking and thus uptake in older adults. So then for the final study, which I'm going to discuss today, so based on analysis of the literature and our previous findings, we kept noticing that when individuals are consuming more of these supplements, they're actually getting thirstier. So we wanted to understand what is driving this thirst with oral nutritional supplement consumption. So we looked at this from a physicochemical point of view, looking at is it the protein or the viscosity profiles or the sweetness of these drinks that's contributing to this increase in thirst with consumption volume? Or is it actually just when you look at older adults, is it the likes of physiological and non-physiological factors such as their gender, their dentures or medication status? Is that contributing to this increase in thirst with consumption volume? So in terms of the experimental design here, so we recruited 72 older adults for this study. And this was completed over 3 different visits. So in each visit, they consumed 4 different supplements, and they were either proteins-enriched supplements or supplements with different viscosity profiles or supplements with different sweetness profiles. And they consumed 4 supplements in each visit, one being a control supplement, so it had no protein or thickener or sweetener added. And then the 3 other supplements then basically varied in terms of their protein profiles or their viscosity profiles or their sweetness levels. At the start of each visit, we took saliva samples for 5 minutes. So this allowed us to record their salivary flow. So we wanted to see if perhaps people are having a lower salivary flow rate, maybe they're suffering from dry mouth, and maybe this is in some way contributing to the desire to consume water or the increased thirst when they're consuming these drinks. After the salivary flow measurement, they were then able to begin the tasting of the products. So they consumed 4 supplements, as I said, and each of the supplements, they consumed 3 sips. So how it worked was they'd consumed the 3 sips of one of the products, and they were then asked to complete a thirst questionnaire. And then once they completed the thirst questionnaire, there was a palate cleansing step before they repeated the entire process again then with the next drinks. And they did this for all 4 of the supplements, and it was the exact same process across each of the 3 visits. So in terms of the results then here, so the majority of the older adults were suffering from diminished thirst in this study. And the thirst ratings both before and after tasting the supplements was low. 71% of the study cohort had low salivary flow rates. And in this study, we didn't find that the physicochemical properties were contributing to this increase in thirst or mouth drying or desire for water consumption. But then when we looked at the older adults in further detail, we saw that the non-denture wearers had higher thirst and desire for water consumption after the sweetened supplements than denture wearers did. Medication-free individuals had higher thirst and desire for water after sweetened supplements than individuals taking medications. Women had a higher desire for water consumption after the sweetened and protein-enriched supplements than men did. They also had lower salivary flow rates than men, and they liked the sweetened supplements less than men. So this might have also been contributing to the increased desire to consume water. So then in terms of the take-home messages here. So the physicochemical properties did not appear to impact on thirst with oral nutritional supplement consumption in this study, but we did find that physiological and non-physiological factors in older adults impacted on thirst with oral nutritional supplement consumption. So I've really quickly run through some of the main findings of the research, but then in terms of next steps, so where could we go from here? So our findings are representative of community dwelling older adults, and they weren't typical cohort of oral nutritional supplement consumers. So it's important now to look at, are our findings, are they representative of a typical cohort of oral nutritional supplement consumers? Then from a methodology point of view, it would be interesting now to look at the repeatability of the techniques that we have used with older adults. And then the thirst piece. So our study was one of the first studies that has actually focused in on this thirst element that's caused by the consumption of these supplements. So there's still a large scientific knowledge gap here that's worth addressing relating to the whole thirst element. So I suppose, what exactly am I working on now? So the work which I've just discussed was mainly for my PhD. So now that I've finished that, I've just taken up a role as a postdoctoral researcher with Food for Health Ireland, specifically on the fermented dairy ingredients pillar. So this pillar looks at developing fermented dairy ingredients to enhance digestive health, developed using state-of-the-art bioconversion technologies. And my role is mainly looking at the sensory profiles and the acceptability of these fermented dairy ingredients. So before we begin with any questions, I just want to acknowledge the funding which I received for this research, which was partly from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and then also from the Irish Research Council. Of course, all the participants that took part, without which none of this research would have been possible. And then also the co-authors and collaborators, in particular my 2 PhD supervisors, Professor Dolores O'Riordan and Dr. Emma Feeney. So I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in and for listening to me speak today, and I'm happy now to answer any questions that you might have.